Chapter 19. A Higher Power and Mystical Things. Throughout my life, I have believed there is a higher power. My parents did not attend a church much, and I really didn't either. Mother did attend the Western Avenue Baptist Church at one time. When I was about 5 or 6, she taught summer Bible school, and I went every day, earning myself a special award of a pocket-sized Bible. I think I still have it somewhere, but it seldom got opened all these years. That does not mean that I don't have religion. What I mean is that I do believe there is a God that we all should be thankful to, and we should be guided by the Bible. It is very hard for me to explain in a simple way, but I do believe there is a heaven in the afterlife. And we should lead our lives so that we will be accepted into an eternal life and be reunited with our loved ones. There are also mystical things that I have experienced. The explanation for these happenings is perhaps from another realm outside the one we live in. I try to explain some of these things through spiritual means. I will start with one experience that may not be a spiritual event, but one of extraterrestrial life. I was not alone when this particular event happened. My cousin Mel Hoax was with me, and he experienced it too. It was a summer night in about 1968 or 69. We had band rehearsal at Larry Killove's house on Rose Lawn in Danville. After rehearsal, Mel and I drove in the Villager truck up North Vermilion on our way to my house on Denmark Road. We both saw a strange white light up north ahead of us, and it seemed to be in the air above the road. We continued home on Winter and across the bridge and the lake. As we crossed the lake, we had a better view of the light, and it was still in the air above the north side of town. We stopped and parked the truck just off the road and past the bridge. As we walked back toward the bridge to get a better view, we saw it do something very strange. The light had been just sitting in one spot when, all at once, it threw a bunch of red sparks toward the ground. It took off straight up into the air. It was not but a few seconds until it was completely gone, nowhere in sight, and we heard not a sound from it. Mel and I were so shocked at what we saw that we could hardly believe our eyes. It was beyond anything we had ever seen before. We went on home and tried to explain to ourselves what we had seen. We, to this day, have no explanation. I have not heard of anyone else who may have seen the same thing that night, and we were in sound mind and judgment at the time. Michelle's mother, Marilyn, passed away from a terrible single-car accident on I-74, November 22, 1972. We were living in her parents' home on Denmark Road at the time. Only 2 years later, her father passed away and was living in Park Forest, Illinois at the time. Soon after, her mother moved back to the Denmark Road house. Michelle and I moved to an apartment at Lake Forest Apartments on North Vermilion. Michelle could continue to attend Edison School, which was just down the street. My mother would come on Monday and stay with us until Friday, and then she would go back home with my dad for the weekend. Marilyn's mother and I had a talk about how she could help us have a new home of our own. She gave me $5,000, saying that that was Marilyn's share of the family inheritance. I told her about my plans to build a home on Poland Road, and she thought that that was a wonderful idea, was pleased that the money was used for that purpose. I selected the builder, Fleming and Weller, and the lot, which was owned by Dan Lamar. Dan and I both worked at Bone. Pat, who also worked at Bone, and I had met and planned to get married about the time the house would be finished. The house was completed in July of 1976, and Pat and I got married that same month, and the three of us moved into the new house. To make a long story short, Pat and I would live there together only 5 years. Michelle attended Liberty School, then on to Northridge Middle School, then to Danville High School. Now I will get to the part about mystical things. There were some strange sightings that I can relate to you as told by Joni. Joni came into my life in 1994. She moved into the house, and a few years later we were married, and we are still living in the house on Poland Road. Joni's daughter Jody moved in with us in about 1996. She was working at Jewel while living with us. She would tell Joni that she felt that someone was watching her while in the house. After dark, in her bedroom, street lights and car lights would show the outline of a person in the room. This happened on more than one occasion. It was frightening to her. During this same time, Joni also had similar encounters. She would see a figure of a woman in the hallway. This would be at night and in the dark. This happened a few times. When it happened, she would quickly get back in the bedroom. These apparitions seemed to not happen after Joni and I were married. Joni's thoughts about this is that perhaps it was my mother or Marilyn watching over me. I, on the other hand, have not had any of these encounters. Thinking about that possibility gives me a very comforting feeling, though. There is something that still weighs heavy on my mind. I will probably never have an answer for this during my lifetime. It was something that happened in the days and weeks prior to Marilyn's accident in November 1972. Marilyn was teaching in her second year at Potomac High School. Also, she was taking classes in the evening at the University of Illinois toward her master's degree. This meant that she would go after work from Potomac to her classes at the U of I and sometimes return home late at night. She told me that on more than one occasion she would be driving home on I-74 in the dark and would see someone along the road. This person would be walking along the side of the road wearing a long raincoat and a hat. When the car would get up closer to the person, it would no longer be there. The person would just disappear. Not only did Marilyn tell me about these sightings, but she also told a fellow teacher at Potomac. I just found this out recently. A musician and songwriter friend of mine, Wayne Acton, is married to Deanna, and she related this same story to me that Marilyn had told her that year. It must have been bothering Marilyn to have talked about it to others. One day, probably a week or so before the accident, Marilyn and I were driving in downtown Danville, and it happened to be by the Fisher Theater. There was a person walking on the sidewalk ahead of us. Marilyn grabbed me and said, "Oh my, there is the person I saw on the highway." This person had on a raincoat and hat just as she had described to me earlier. As we got closer to the person on the sidewalk, I got a better look at his face. I said, "I know who that is. That is Don Goodwin, the county coroner." At the time, we didn't read too much more into it. That terrible night of November 21st and into the early hours of the 22nd will be with me forever. I had called the state police because she didn't make it home by midnight on the 21st, which was our be home by promise. It was a terrifying 2 hours before I got a call back from them saying that I should stay home and someone would come to my house. As a car pulled into the driveway and I ran out to see what I could find out. It was Don Goodwin, the county coroner. He had Marilyn's purse in his hand. He gave it to me and told me Marilyn had been killed in an accident. He asked if I would be okay there by myself. I said I would be okay. He left and I went in the house where Michelle was asleep in bed. I made 2 phone calls, one to her parents and one to my parents. Those were the hardest phone calls anyone can ever make. I just don't have answers, and I may never have answers, but I hope someday I do.